Nikki, all last week, I had that song from Moulin Rouge ringing around in my ears. And I have never heard it quite the way that you performed it. You know, it was, maybe it's because Moulin Rouge came out in the early 2000s. And this week, this song from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, that's going to be rattling around my head. For those of you who don't know, that was a song from the Disney animated movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Who's seen it recently? I know it's a big favorite. Everybody always says, oh, Quasimodo is my favorite Disney character, right? No? Okay. So Esmeralda is singing this song in the movie. She refers to herself as a gypsy. That's not a term that we get to use. We use the term Romani because that's the actual term for the folks that are pejoratively dismissed with the term that she was using for herself. And in the movie, you have Quasimodo, who has been pushed to the margins of society so much so because of his deformation, his hunchback, that yes, he's embraced by a church, right? But gets to live in a bell tower. Gets to ring the bell tower. He gets fed, sure, but his main friends are gargoyles. And not the fun kind of gargoyles, right? Just in the movie, they have personalities and everything, but that's not the way it was in the book so much, right? And Esmeralda and Quasimodo see a kindredship with one another because they are both experiencing marginalization, being outcasts in different ways. There's also a cardinal character in this movie who is so potently relevant to us today, but that would be using up material for a future sermon illustration. So I won't go there, but I hope I put a bug in your ear. And if you're wondering, hey, what Disney movie should I watch from the 90s? I hope you consider this one. It's a good one. It has a lot to say to us, especially us, European descendant Christians today. Now, switching from that work of fiction to another lovely work of fiction, a couple of years ago, I was playing a video game on my Switch. It came out years before that. It was called Ni no Kuni. I know, that's another one of those games. You hear that and you're like, everybody knows Ni no Kuni, right? But it was one of those games that's like cute, and I could play it around Brio, I thought. But there's actually some really potent, powerful moments that happen in it. So this character in the middle, this is Oliver. Oliver is the protagonist of the story. And he experiences this trauma at the beginning. His mom is rendered lifeless, saving him from drowning after he makes a terrible, terrible mistake. This is like a parent's worst nightmare, right? And I'm playing this, and Brio's 3, and I'm already super raw all the time anyway, because there's something that happened to me when Brio was born, and that is I cry now. I cry when I see parent stuff. I cry when I see, parents playing with their kids on TV. I'm like, ah. I cry when something tragic happens to kids. I don't know what it is. Before, I'm a repressor by nature, and I thought I've shoved that down pretty good. But with Brio, not so much. So I wasn't expecting an hour into this game to be crying, this horrible thing that happens. But then Oliver is whisked away to this strange new fantasy world. And as you know, all the best fantasy worlds are magical places, right? With magical characters, crazy things happen in it. That's the kind of stuff that we just, our inner child delights in seeing, right? And Oliver keeps encountering these people that have a huge problem. They are broken-hearted. He keeps encountering these broken-hearted people. In a traditional game, this is the point that he would be vanquishing his foes, right? Because these broken-hearted people often lash out at him. But instead, he seeks to help them with their broken hearts. And as you progress in the game, he's trying to help, maybe potentially save his mom. Maybe he can bring her back. But then you realize, as he's working with other people, more and more people who are healing in their broken hearts, the world is also healing, and Oliver is healing. Our wellness is wrapped up in the wellness of one another. Our healing is wrapped up in the healing of our society, the healing of our neighbors. Now, in this story that was read in our scriptures, we have this important tale told about the recruiting of a disciple named Matthew. And interestingly enough, Matthew, when he responds to the call of Jesus and he says, "Okay, that sounds good." Yeah. That's one of the fun things about these stories. Like, how often do you get somebody coming up to you like, "Hey, come and follow me," and you're like, "Yeah, sure," So Matthew's one of these disciples. He good enough for him. He leaves his profession, being a tax collector, and he follows Jesus. And as we know, Jesus is an itinerant, wandering teacher. He is houseless, essentially. They spend a lot of time camping. Sometimes they're couch surfing. They're usually dependent on the kindness of others. And here they are, after Matthew has been invited in as a disciple, and Matthew invites Jesus over to his house, along with all of his friends. His friends, who our text just tells us, are called tax collectors and, did you catch the word? Sinners. Now, what comes to your mind when you hear this word sinners? Who do you think the sinners are? Everybody, okay. We have some other characters in this story who would disagree with you, right? There's some sort of distinction being made, right? If you're like me, you grew up hearing that these sinners are prostitutes. But our text never tells us that, and I checked the parallels. None of the other versions of the story tell us that either. It's important for us to remember sex trade was actually legal in Jesus' day, and prostitution was one of the only legal professions that women could have, that they were allowed, right? Now, they were looked down on, and the Pharisees we encounter in the story certainly may see them as sinners, but for some reason, that relationship didn't work both ways. Like, John's were not necessarily seen as sinners. I wonder why that is. Really, this term sinners refers to anybody who's not really living a Torah-observant life. That's what it is. Somebody who's just not following the Torah, or at least not following the Torah to the degree that the Pharisees urge. That would include a lot of people, I would assume. It certainly includes a lot of people today, right? So, he is eating. He's having a party at Matthew's house with all of these tax collectors and sinners. Tax collectors, why are they stuck having the company of these sinners? Well, because they are also looked down upon. They have the unenviable task of collecting funds for the government that is oppressing them. They've been colonized by Rome. Well, got to pay your tax. That's part of how you know that you're put in your place. And it's also part of why you've been colonized. Rome wants these financial resources. It's kind of a cycle. And so they are, their source of friends, it's limited. Sinners and tax collectors, both are outcasts. Both are outcasts. So the Pharisees approach Jesus' disciples, and they ask them, hey, why does your teacher, these are also teachers, right? Why does your teacher dine with such scum? That's actually how the Message puts it. And Jesus overhears this, and he says, it's not those who think they're healthy. Well, he just says, it's not those who are healthy who need a physician, a doctor. It's those who are sick. It's not the righteous that I'm here for. And I picture that as those who consider themselves righteous, because Jesus certainly doesn't consider these Pharisees righteous, right? It's those who are sinners. And to drive his point home, he's telling these Bible teachers, you need to go back and read your Bibles. Go read the book of Hosea. Tell me what it means when Hosea says, I desire, this is God, and Hosea is saying, God's saying this, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Go back and read your Bibles. I find myself thinking that so often on social media when I see one blazing hot comment after another expressing how me and so many of my friends are the worst. We're heretics. We dine with sinners. And here in the story, I see, well, that's exactly the kind of company we're supposed to be keeping. I mean, we are included in that. We make mistakes. I don't want to think of myself as one who is so righteous, I've got nothing left to learn. That's a trap. That's a trap. So Jesus, we see in this story, is siding with people who are marginalized. And this shouldn't be surprising if you've read, the Gospels. That's almost always what Jesus is doing. It doesn't mean that he always takes, he doesn't always validate every life choice they may make, but he's always on their side. The woman caught in adultery. Go and sin no more, he says. The rest of you, drop your rocks. So, actually, those of you without sin may throw the first stone. But that's essentially enough that they all drop their rocks. So we're nearing the end of our harvest season. And there's a theme this week that I really was looking forward to addressing. 3 different people contributed something on the reader board that aligned with providing community for those who feel like outcasts, who may be outcasts. And I found myself having some trouble with this because outcast is kind of a nebulous term. What does it mean? I've had seasons of my life I was an outcast. But I also carry a lot of privilege with me, right? So you've heard some little bits of my story so far, but when I started deconstructing, I lost my entire career network. I was a youth pastor, full-time youth ministry, and I had a few different church planting organizations that wanted me to plant whatever next evangelical church plants. And I turned them down, or I said, let's wait a year. Stephanie and I are We're doing some traveling. When we come back, we'll see. But then I started tugging on some theological strands, things that I didn't think of necessarily as driving me into this new direction for my life. But I pulled on one loose thread, and so much of it just unraveled. And I found myself no longer believing in eternal conscious torment. That's Bible college speak for how most of us view hell, right? And no longer seeing colonization as a good and necessary thing for some reason, right? And my heart was pricked by how much justification the church had done for acquiring not just the resources of other places and not just stealing other places, but acquiring people and using my faith for that. People that I saw as heroes, and now I'm realizing they're not. This isn't Jesus stuff. And when I had these questions with me, or I was trying to talk this stuff through, I could no longer be in ministry in that world. And I lost my mentors. I lost my pastoral support. I lost almost all of my friends. I didn't lose my family. A lot of people do, but I didn't, and I'm grateful for that. And Stephanie was on that journey with me too. A lot of people's partners don't go with them on this journey, not very far. I'm so grateful Stephanie did. So I found myself cast out. So I have an experience of being an outcast in that way. But I am a straight, cisgender, white male, and I also align Protestant. So I carry a lot of privilege with me still. And so there's aspects, immense aspects of being marginalized I've not experienced. One of the things I was going to ask all of you is, how do you interpret the term outcast? But if we do that, we're not going to have enough time for another exercise I'm going to ask you to do. So I'm going to be a little picky and choosy here. But I'm looking at this term and I'm using it broadly, and one of the things that I appreciate is that some in our community, some in Park Rose Community United Church of Christ, care so much for folks who have experienced this brokenheartedness that I've experienced, and that so many of you have experienced, and that so many of our neighbors experience, that they are asking, how, God, can we provide community support for those who feel like outcasts? One of them worded it in a way that I think it recognized. That doesn't mean we draw them into the church necessarily. You know, that particular Post-it note said, just how do we, I want God to show us how we can how we can help provide community support. And another person said, maybe support groups. You know, you can tell this person's trying to think this out. Maybe a church service isn't going to be the best thing for everybody who's experiencing this. Maybe they need something else. I don't have all of the answers on this. I've got a couple of ideas. And if I had thought ahead, I would have brought one of those pumpkins up with me that all of you should have. Go ahead and pick up your pumpkin. Yeah. And if you don't have a pumpkin, raise your hand, and we can get you a pumpkin. And all of you should have a writing utensil. Okay, I see that hand. We need a pumpkin for this gentleman right here. Another one over here. So in the front, two in the front. Would you like a pumpkin? Oh, you've got one. Nikki, would you like a pumpkin and a pen? Okay. Okay, so a pumpkin for Nikki as well. So if I had a pumpkin and a pen with me right now, I think one of the things I would put down is a group of support for those who are deconstructing. And I mentioned this during the interview. This is something that's been on my heart for a long time. I think I would call it the Deconstructicons. And if you're a child of the 80s, you may appreciate that. Yes, it's a Transformers reference. And no, it's not copyrights because there's no such thing as a Deconstructicon. So I thought that was fun. Here you go, Nikki. That's one of the things I'd put down. I think that would look different than a lot of groups. It would look different than a traditional Bible study, for example. We would have to deal with whatever people in that group are dealing with. We all come in this journey in different ways, right? And if I had a second pumpkin, I would put on there name tags with our pronouns on there. I've known so many folks, as soon as they walk into a church, they're seeking out community, and then they get misgendered for an hour if they stick around for coffee time. And if we see them again, it's by their own graciousness. Imagine if you keep being misgendered all throughout fellowship time, right? That's rough. So that's what I would put on one of those. But you probably have your own ideas. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Go ahead and write on your pumpkins. And then we'll come, what? Oh, good question. Write on your pumpkins a potential way that we could support community for those who are feeling ostracized. You know, I ordered silver Sharpies, and they did not get to my house on time. So I was going to have them on the front, but you could put them on the back. Silver Sharpies are magical writing utensils. When you are done, I ask you to turn those over and then pass them to the front. Don't feel like you need to sign your work, just in case you feel like you want to not be restrained by, us knowing who says what. Let's put them right here. On that chair right there. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Now, I do want to share some thoughts that I have on this. Not that I have all of the answers. Um, but faced with this question, how do we best help others heal in community? I'll state there's no one right answer for this. But we do get some insights, I think, that are worth paying attention to. First, when we think of who are we in the story, we must recognize that we are not Jesus. We're a lot more like Matthew, the other sinners, than we're like Jesus. And I'm saying this for a reason. I'll get to it in a bit more. I think it's important that we recognize that we may find healing with Jesus, but we are not by ourselves the healers. It is not all on us. We are not messianic figures. And we may be like Oliver at times, recognizing the hurt of the brokenhearted and helping them in their healing, but like Oliver, we must also recognize that we carry our own woundedness with us. We also recognize that as long as our neighbors are brokenhearted, and as long as this world needs healing, we ourselves are not well. Not entirely. We're not entirely well. The health of our neighborhood and our neighbors is not disconnected from our own health. So we recognize that our fates are bound up in each other. I think of this often in all of the many ways that we're presented with the reality that we are in an integrated ecosystem with all other things. I was bothered to learn a year and a half ago that all of us have microplastics in our bodies now. That's cool. Awesome. We are all connected. The problems of the world are our problems too. And the last thing I'm going to say on this, the very last thing, is that this is not a you thing. And this is not an I thing, but this is a we thing. We are called to be community and to be communities of support. We're not called to be lone rangers. We're trying to go out on our own to heal the world by ourselves. That is a path of burnout, and I imagine some of you have experienced that before too. In church, with all of that said, I invite you to stand up if you are able and if you would like, so we can join together in our next song, The Gift of Love.